Joyce. The question is the motion should be agreed to. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I think we should thank the Leader of the Opposition for that contribution because it at least was an argument, even if it was an incoherent argument. For Mr Norman's benefit, Mr Speaker, the roads of national significance are not there necessarily for political reasons. They are there for congestion reasons, Mr Speaker. They are there for congestion reasons. And the reason that we don't build motorways in small regional areas, Mr Speaker, is there is no congestion, Mr Speaker. And in Auckland, weirdly, there has been congestion, and Victoria Park has actually been a project that's already been successful. Waterview's being successful, Mr Speaker. The Waikato Expressway is hugely important for the New Zealand economy, Mr Speaker, and that's because these roads are yes, and Puhoi to Warkworth still carries more traffic every day than the entire Auckland rail network, Mr Speaker. We can't go, still carries more than the entire Auckland railway network, Mr Speaker. So here we are with the Greens' incoherent economic policy. And of course the other problem for Mr Norman is that he says we should have a, in quote, smart green economy, which means we just subsidise jobs with taxpayers' money, Mr Speaker. He should visit the communities where his policies are having the most negative impact, Mr Speaker, where the Greens are out there arguing against economic growth in places like Northland, in places like Gisborne. He should go there and actually tell them to support oil and gas and mineral exploration if he really cared about jobs in this country, Mr Speaker. But he doesn't. He cares about them elsewhere, Mr Speaker. But at least they have an argument, Mr Speaker. At least the Greens have some form of argument. In the Labour Party, Mr Speaker, the argument is amongst the Labour Party about that vexed question of which David should lead the National Party, Mr Speaker. And the continuing saga of David and David and David, Mr Speaker, continues. We have, of course, denying David in the House right now, Mr Parker. Mr Parker's denying David. He's actually gone to become Mr Deluded David. He's now Mr Deluded David because he actually thinks that Labor has an orthodox economic policy. He actually thinks they have a positive pro-mining policy. He hasn't spoken to their energy and resources spokesperson who says the oil and gas should stay in the ground. He hasn't spoken to Mr Shearer who thinks that mines should be banned. I've seen the placards that Mr Shearer was carrying. So that's Deluded Dave, Mr Speaker. Then, of course, we have Dark Dave.
Order. Members should be referred to by their correct names.
I'm just getting there, Mr Speaker.
Well,
Mr David Cunliffe I was referring to. Mr Honourable David Cunliffe, who's been wearing quite a scowl. At least I thought it was a scowl, but I suspect it may actually be 5 o'clock shadow since he didn't get the leadership. And I don't want to cast aspersions, Mr Speaker, but I think we now call him Denuded Dave because he has indeed had the shave. He's had the shave, and of course it was a close shave that he didn't get the Labor leadership. And we always said if he had a shave, that meant that the challenge was on, Mr Speaker. And indeed the challenge is on, Mr Speaker, because he turned up at the Parliament yesterday with the Three Musketeers, with Ms Dalziel, Sir William Seo and Ross Robertson. And the interesting thing about it being Sir William Seo who turned up with David Cunliffe is that he was the one that ran the criticism of the Labor Party's policy last week and completely tripped up the pro-tem leader of the Labor Party, David Shearer. And right when he was trying to do something, there was Mr Sir William Seo, and he turns up in the Parliament yesterday alongside David Cunliffe, Mr Speaker, who was grinning from ear to ear and saying Arnie Schwarzenegger-like, "I'm back. I'm back. I've had my shave and I'm ready for the challenge, Mr Speaker." And then, of course, there's the third Dave. What's his name? Can't remember his name. But anyway, he's the one who's not having an impact, Mr Speaker. He's not having an impact, that David. We're just not quite sure who he is. But I suppose it's true that it's better the David you know or the David you don't know. Maybe it's better the David you don't know than the one that you don't know even worse. That's possibly the issue, Mr Speaker. So we have, at least with the Greens, they have some sort of argument. It's a very, very poor argument, and it's a bad argument for New Zealand. And in Labor, Mr Speaker, the argument is all within the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. And meanwhile, on the government side of the benches, Mr Speaker, we are focused on one very, very important thing. The massive opportunity that exists for New Zealand, if we want to take it up, for our exports over the next 20 years, Mr Speaker. The opportunity in Asia, Mr Speaker, is absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal, Mr Speaker. we have already something like...
The Honourable David Parker.
Speaker, that was a very shallow contribution from the